5:30, and we'll go ahead and start to begin. I'm going to call the San Bruno City Council special meeting of September 28, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. to order. May you please take roll call.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Here.
Councilmember Mason? I don't see her in the room yet. Councilmember Salazar?
Here.
Vice Mayor Marty Medina?
Here.
Mayor Rico Medina?
Here. We'll move on to item 3, public comments for items not on the agenda. We are having a public hearing regarding districting, not re, but districting. Are there any hands that wish to speak for items not on the agenda at this time under public comment? Seeing none, we will move into the public hearing, which is hold public hearings to 1, receive a report from staff on the districting process and permissible criteria to be considered to create district boundaries. 2, direct staff on the possible formation of a districting commission. And 3, conduct a public hearing to receive public input on districting boundaries. And we'll turn it over to the city manager.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, and members of the public. Javon Grogan, City Manager. We have a presentation for you tonight, and we will end with discussion and direction, hopefully. I'll give the first presentation. The second presentation will be by the National Demographics Corporation, which is the city's hired districting expert. And then the final third presentation of the night will be done by Tri-Peppy Smith, the city's public. Second, we're having a technical issue. The city's Tri-Peppy Smith, the city's communications, outreach, and public engagement consultant for this effort. And then finally, we'll have discussion. And so first, why don't we begin with just a little background, why district elections and why now? So for the members of the public, and I know the City Council knows this, the City of San Bruno is in the process of making a change on how voters elect members to the San Bruno City Council. And this is being done at a time along with hundreds and frankly thousands of cities and school districts across the state that are undergoing similar changes. And all of it is related to compliance with the California Voters' Rights Act. And we'll talk a lot about that. And there's a lot of data that is a part of this project. It will replace the city's current at-large citywide election structure, where we currently elect a directly elected mayor and 4 council members at large. This process, and we'll talk a little bit about this tonight in the second presentation, will not change the directly elected mayor model, but it will change the council member process by, as you see the diagram there in blue, all 4 council members are elected at large. One model, and there are various models that can be talked about, but it's to have a model where you have 4 roughly equal-sized districts with the directly elected mayor. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and the structures that are open to the city of San Bruno, given the ballot measure in 1977 that called for the city of San Bruno to elect 4 council members and 1 directly elected mayor. What options are available to the city in compliance with that structure that was outlined. So why now? The City Council will remember on March 10th, there was a staff report and a presentation about potential exposure to litigation and attorney's fees with regard to the California Voting Rights Act. And just locally, there was, in yesterday's paper, the city of Belmont received a letter and has decided to transition to district elections. And we know a number of cities in our county and across the state have done so as well. And the City Council on March 10th, 2020, received a presentation by NDC about transitioning to a by-district method. This, though, was right at the beginning of COVID-19, and there were a lot of concerns about how could we have public engagement and all the required public outreach at the beginning of what we now know has been a 1.5 year plus pandemic. And so on March 24th, the council made a decision and they passed a motion to postpone the analysis and the effort until 2022, and that's the November 2022 election. And council will remember in June of this year, we took a contract to you for your approval, and that was the National Demographics Corporation's contract. And in the budget, you included funds for the community outreach. And you'll see in the presentation, that third presentation by Tri-Pepe Smith, that the community outreach that is planned for this effort is frankly far and above what we've done on most of any of our projects. And rightfully so, because this process will forever change how council members are elected. And so we need to do an extremely thorough job at reaching out to our community in multiple language and multiple venues, and we have planned and are prepared to do that. And a part of that, we'll be asking members of the community to help us draw the district maps. What are the communities of interest within the city of San Bruno? And so there will be various efforts where members of the community, both virtually and we're planning in person, will be able to draw maps that will inform the decision-making process. And so we're ready for that discussion and really look forward to what will, between now and April, will be a very robust process of engagement and decision-making by both the council and members of the community. Quick project team introduction. You have your city staff, and so this is being worked on by various staff in the city manager's office, as well as the city clerk's office and the city attorney's office. Jennifer Dianos, the assistant to the city manager, is our lead analyst on the project and providing direct support to our consultants. I am intimately involved, as is your city attorney, your city clerk, and your assistant city manager, Jennifer Rizal. Really the full support of the city manager's office and the city attorney's office is supporting this project because it is so integral to the city of San Bruno. As I said before, National Demographics Corporation, a districting expert that will support the city with demographic analysis. You'll receive a presentation by Kristen Parks just shortly after I sit down, and then Tri-Pepe Smith for public engagement and public outreach. You'll receive a presentation by Jennifer Netwig. And so with that, I'm going to end my presentation, and Kristen Parks from NDC will share her screen and her presentation. Thank you, council.
Good evening, council members and Mayor Medina. My name is Kristen Parks. I'm a consultant with National Demographics. And tonight I'm going to give you an overview of the districting process and share with you the initial demographic data that we have available. So diving right in here. As you know, San Bruno currently uses an at-large system to elect city council members. And as the city manager explained to us in those introductory remarks, in 2020, San Bruno proactively decided to adopt a resolution to transition to by-district elections. So that is where we are now, is actually starting that process. So a little bit of background, perhaps for members of the public who aren't familiar. California has a Voting Rights Act that was written to encourage jurisdictions to adopt by-district elections. And so what San Bruno chose to do, rather than wait to receive a claim of violation of this law, was San Bruno proactively adopted a resolution, and this helped the city avoid potentially very costly litigation. So that's why we're here. And again, you heard it from the city manager already. And again, I'm rehashing a little bit, but bear with me, that San Bruno currently has a directly elected mayor and a 4-member city council. And therefore, it's logical that the districting process here will create 4 city council districts, and each district will elect 1 council member to represent it. So again, here's how that looks graphically. You just saw this. All right, now we're getting into what's new. Our timeline for districting is driven by 4 required public hearings that must be held prior to the adoption of the district map, as well as taking into consideration the elections coming in 2022 and making sure that all of this is complete with enough time for the county registrar of voters to assign voters to precincts. So what's unusual about this cycle in this year is usually after the decennial census, we receive census data quite quickly in the first few months of the year. However, due to delays in the processing of 2020's census data, instead of receiving that data at the end of March, the US Census Bureau released it on August 12th. So I will be showing you in this presentation demographic data released on August 12th. That is the final population data coming from the US Census Bureau. However, there's another step that the state of California takes, and this is new for California, and that is for California to make adjustments to the census data, primarily with regard to our state prison population and reassigning state prisoners back to their last known home address and counting them there rather than in the location of the prison. That data was released on September 20th, I think actually after midnight, so maybe technically September 21st. National Demographics is currently combing through that data. We're finding a number of errors, and so what you're going to see tonight doesn't account for that new release of data, but we will have that process soon. And I can speak to the new total population number when we get to that point. So San Bruno has already scheduled the 4 public hearings. 2 are required to be held prior to the release of any actual district maps, any proposed maps. So this is the first hearing. There will be another on October 19th. This is primarily to educate the public and to receive public input on communities of interest and the public's priorities for districting. There will also be community workshops in the month of November, and the purpose of those workshops is to provide a little bit more informal opportunity for the public to engage with the process and for us to demo the software that we're using and making available to the public so that they can actually draw their own district maps and submit them to be considered by the council. So there are 2 more public hearings, January and February, where we'll actually look at the maps that have been drafted and make revisions to them and hopefully find a final map, a consensus around a final map that the council can adopt. This full schedule and all of the details can be found on the districting website, which is districtingsanbruno.org. So everything that you're going to want to find related to redistricting is there. So in terms of the process, the council can choose one of 3 routes. And the first route is for city council to retain the authority to adopt the district map after conducting extensive public outreach and engagement, right? As we saw already, we have already planned for 4 public hearings plus additional community workshops. So we're already planning for that extensive public outreach and engagement. The city has also retained the services of Tri-Pepe Smith, who have expertise in their consulting in this area. So that's the first option. The second option is for the city to appoint an advisory commission that can focus on the districting process. What the advisory commission would do would be to hold a series of meetings themselves to review draft and proposed maps and ultimately recommend a map to the council. However, with an advisory commission, the council retains the authority to adopt the map that's recommended or make changes to it or completely reject it. So the council does retain that ultimate decision-making power. The advisory commission just helps along the way as a specialized body for districting. Thirdly, there's independent commissions and hybrid commissions. These commissions we tend to see in larger cities or in cities where the districting process may be more contentious or under more public scrutiny. And what these commissions do is really take that, the council delegates the authority, some of the decision-making authority to the commission and takes it out of the council's hands. The council can set the appointment process for these commissioners, but may not directly appoint them. There are extensive legal rules and requirements for independent and hybrid commissions. Independent commissions are slightly different from hybrid commissions. I'm grouping them together here. But if there is interest in going in that direction, I can certainly provide more information. But ultimately, an independent commission will choose the final district map. A hybrid commission will recommend 2 maps, of which the council must adopt 1. So I'm going to say that one more time, just because I know it's confusing. Independent commission has the authority to actually adopt a district map. A hybrid commission will recommend 2 maps to council, and council must adopt 1 of the 2. So these are the 3 options. Of these 3 options, NDC has, we probably have almost 100 cities that we're working with in the state of California, and we have cities that have chosen to go each of these 3 directions. However, most commonly, we're seeing city council drive the process, particularly because of the time constraints that we're seeing with the late release of the census data. If we'd been able to start this process back in April, there would have been a lot more time to recruit commissioners and go through the extensive vetting and education and getting the commissions up to speed. That is a little bit of a time crunch. It is still possible. So once we choose how we're going to do this, then there are additional legal requirements guiding what we consider when we actually start putting pen to paper to draw boundaries for districts. And first and always supreme is our federal law, as you all know. Federal law says when we draw these districts, each one should have more or less the same population. And that is a way to ensure fairness, that each council member is representing more or less the same number of residents. We have to make sure we're complying with the Federal Voting Rights Act, which says we need to be sure that our district's boundaries are not taking away voting power from protected classes of voters. So for that reason, we will look at voting age citizen data by race and ethnicity. However, federal law says we cannot draw districts based solely on race or ethnicity, and that can't be the main thing we're looking at. So we're also going to look at other demographic information as well. In the state of California, there is a new law in place called the Fair Maps Act, and the Fair Maps Act gives cities a list of criteria that must be considered when drawing district boundaries. And not only do we have to consider all of 4 of these criteria, we have to consider them in order. So what we're given is a rank ordered list. So what that means is the top of the list, number 1, is actually more important than number 4. So to the extent practicable, the law says districts should be contiguous. What that means is each district should be one whole piece, all connected, and no disconnected separate pieces of that district. So that's about the shape of the district. The second criterion is to minimize the division of neighborhoods and communities of interest within the city. which means as we're drawing boundaries, we don't want to divide up our neighborhoods into different council districts, the same for our communities of interest. Third, to create easily identifiable boundaries. And the way that we can do that is by making sure that our district boundaries follow natural lines that we're already familiar with, roads or highways, waterways, that sort of thing. 4 is to maintain compactness, or to draw districts that are compact. And when we're talking about compactness, we're talking about population. And if we are drawing a district, we want to make sure we're not intentionally bypassing a population of people so that we can go farther away and include within the district a more distant population. So if your district is not compact, often it will be a strange shape and you can identify it that way. But again, sometimes you may need to draw a district that isn't compact. For instance, if you are ensuring compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act. California law also tells us we can't draw district boundaries that favor or discriminate against a political party. So again, we won't even be looking at party registration data, partisanship, or any of that. Now, there may be other goals that are unique to the city of San Bruno. Of course, preserve core of existing districts should not be on this slide because there are no existing districts in San Bruno, so scratch that one. But and the same with minimizing changes. Well, minimizing changes to election cycles simply means we don't want to put any voters in San Bruno that expect to vote for their council members in 2022 into districts where they wouldn't have a chance to vote until 2024. This list of other goals here, though, it can be anything. And the point being that once we've complied with federal and state law, we can talk about other criteria. We just need to make sure that those other criteria don't violate state or federal law. This is a lot. We'll be mentioning these things throughout the process, and they're all described on the website. So if members of the public are hearing this and they're a bit overwhelmed, it's all laid out for you on the website, and we will refer back to these criteria as we start looking at specific maps. So looking at what the census shows us from 2020, it showed a total population for the city of San Bruno of 43,908 people. After the state reallocated prisoners, and this is not shown on the slide, San Bruno only gained an additional 39 people. So that number will go up by 39 people, but that's a quite small difference. We take the total population of the city and we divide it by the number of districts we're going to draw, which is 4. So if we divide that total population by 4, we get the ideal population size for each district. And in this case, we're going to look for each district to contain just 10,977 people. And what you're looking at here in terms of the demographics is citywide, right? Because we don't have districts yet. We're looking at some citywide data. All of this data is available to be shown on maps. So I'm going to show some of it to you at the census. It'll be displayed at the census block level. And so you can see, you can start to get a sense of what the demographics of different parts of the city look like. So looking at Latino CVAP, CVAP is just an acronym that stands for Citizen Voting Age Population. So again, when we're talking about the Voting Rights Act, we want to look at where voting age, so over 18 citizens are. And so this is where some of those Latino populations are concentrated. All of the maps that I'm going to show you are heat maps. So So heat maps go from cold to hot, warm, right? And so the purples and blues are areas with smaller percentages of Latinos, and then up to the yellow and red, we have 75% to 100% of that block being Latino in the red blocks. So that's how you interpret all of these maps. They will hopefully be useful for the public and the council in identifying where there may be communities of interest in the city and areas that may wish to be grouped together into a district. So here's the same map for African American voting age population, voting age citizens. You can see there's very few. Most of the city is under 10% per city block. We can't go down any lower than the city block. So when I show a map like this, it's important for me to point out that we want to hear from the public, and the public should bring their testimony for sure if there are particular geographic areas where there are African American residents of San Bruno have a community of interest that they may want to bring to the table to talk about for districting. So even though this is doesn't show us between 0 and 10%, please don't look at this map and think, oh, there's no African Americans in San Bruno, right? That wouldn't be true. This is the map for Asian American voting age citizens. So same exact heat map. You see the Asian American populations are distributed across the city. And we are well aware that many of the Asian American communities, you know, as with the Latino communities, may identify differently based on different languages they speak or whatever. And we are only showing what data we get from the Census Bureau. So there's definitely diversity and variation within these communities, so that what we're showing you is just the starting point. We can look at the percentage of people that are speaking Spanish at home. And again, you get a slightly different map. So there's a lot of demographics we can show. This map shows the percentage of families with children under 18 at home for each block. And this one is showing you the percentage of renters displayed at each census block, or this may be block group. You can see that the shapes are a little bit larger. So I've mentioned a couple times now communities of interest. It's probably useful to define that term as it is specific to redistricting. If you remember when I talked about California state law says we should minimize the division of communities of interest when we're drawing district boundaries. We want to try to keep communities of interest together within a single district so that that community has a chance to be fairly represented. So state law defines a community of interest as a population sharing social or economic interests in common. And the reason that we care about this is when we draw districts, each district will group together neighborhoods and communities of interest. So we want to make sure we're minimizing the division of those communities into multiple council districts. And communities of interest are not an objective thing. I can't tell San Bruno what the communities of interest are. That is where we need to hear from the council and the community members as to where their communities are, and particularly the communities that they care to be kept within a single council district with one council member representing them. So these communities, I also like to say, you can define them in almost any way you want. There is no wrong answer, right? We want to hear from it. And any comment that the public brings telling us, you know, here is my community. We are a community of, you know, folks that are living in, you know, there's three, I'm going to give maybe an example from the county of San Mateo, right? If there's an area of the county where there's multiple mobile home parks that consider themselves a community in the sense that they have shared experiences, and the county regulates some of the things that affect the mobile home parks. So they may identify as one community to interact with the county. They may want to be kept in one district. Of course, these are ones that are geographically in the same area. So what brings that community together and where is it? Those are the only things that we really need to know from the public. So if you're tuning in via Zoom and you are interested in making a public comment, these questions here can help structure what you let us know starting at this point tonight. Because again, when we draw district boundaries, we're going to want to draw districts that are a collection of communities. So what are those communities, right? They're at an even smaller level than the district itself. You can also look at things like transit, like maybe folks that are living all around the BART station that may have similar issues, concerns, experiences. That may be one way to define a community of interest. Zoning areas, school attendance zones. And though I will point out that school districts, attendance zones are not the same as school board, right? And that's a totally separate process governed by the education code. So the city's districting process is very different than legally what schools will do. However, we can talk about communities being the people who, you know, their kids all go to the same school, or they live all around the same park, or share some of the same, you know, people who maybe work all for, you know, YouTube have some shared interests. I don't know, right? There's many different ways to define what your community is. NDC offers to the public, beyond just that testimony, we offer a way for the public to actually submit maps. And what's great about these mapping tools is that they're actually very easy to use. So once NDC finishes processing the California adjusted data, we'll be launching a paper map that folks can actually draw on with pens and pencils to draw their ideal district, or draw all 4 districts that they want to propose for the city of San Bruno, as well as an online tool that you use a paintbrush to draw on. It's a very easy to use tool, but the nice thing about the online tool is you can look at some of those demographic data points that I just showed you on the online mapping tool. And so that can be helpful, as well as the population information. So these tools will all be available within the coming weeks. So certainly there will be announcements made about those, and the paper maps will also be posted on the website in PDF form, so folks can print them out at home and draw maps on them. What's great about this is that it really gives the public a way to participate in this process, and perhaps even at the end, NDC often sees maps be adopted that were originally drawn by a resident of that jurisdiction. So that's pretty cool. You know, it may go through revisions, but ultimately the public can drive this process to the extent that they get involved and engaged with it. So public mapping tools are a great resource for that. And I am going to pass it now over to Peppy Smith to talk a little bit about outreach. Thank you very much.
Perfect. And thank you, Kristen, as I get these slides up. Okay, can everyone see those okay? Perfect. Okay, well, good evening, members of City Council. My name is Jennifer Nentwig, as has been mentioned, and I'm with Pepe Smith, the public affairs and marketing firm that the city and NDC are partnering with to publicize and garner the outreach and engagement for this district formation effort. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight and share an update with you about the outreach and engagement efforts so far. So on this slide, you can see an outline for what I'll be sharing with you tonight. Basically just a high-level overview of the outreach and engagement efforts to date, and an introduction to some of the significant outreach and engagement plans that we have for moving forward. And before I get into the examples of these outreach efforts, I do want to pause and focus on the why for a moment. So to piggyback on some of the things that Kristen Parks from NDC mentioned, it is incredibly important that the members of the San Bruno community have a voice in this process of forming districts. So it is the community members who know their neighborhoods, their communities best. And so we want to do everything we can to help San Bruno reach your diverse community members and help them feel heard, help them have a voice in this process. And so that's really what we'll be talking about here tonight. So then here you can see, as I mentioned, we have partnered with the city to launch a dedicated website on the district formation. It rolled out on September 21st, and on this site, members of the public can find extensive resources to learn about the process, access all the materials and meeting information, and see opportunities to provide feedback. So you can see in the screenshot that visitors to the website have the option of selecting their language. And the website will continue to be updated throughout the process, including resources such as press releases, meeting recordings and materials from each hearing and workshop moving forward, and eventually the tools that members of the public will need to develop their own draft maps. And on the site as well, you can see the multiple opportunities for community members to participate by either signing up to subscribe to email updates or utilizing that contact tab to provide feedback directly. And then on this slide, you can see the initial press release that has already been distributed so far. So that was sent out on September 23rd to both print and online media. So that's pretty self-explanatory there. And then we've also started to partner with the city to push out social media on this topic. So here's an example of what went out on September 24th in multiple languages, as you can see. It went out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Nextdoor, and we'll continue to partner with the city to have district formation content going out once a week on all platforms moving forward. And we'll also continue to have translations available for those. In addition to Spanish, moving forward, we will have Cantonese and Mandarin as well. And to further emphasize the multilingual approach, here you can see that we plan to have translated materials and or interpreters available for social media. As I just mentioned, on the website, to elaborate on the languages that are available, you can see here, this isn't even a full list that you can see on your screen. There's just dozens of all different languages that will automatically translate all the content on the site available to community members. And then for the upcoming community workshops, we plan to have interpreters available there in Spanish, Cantonese, and Mandarin to support any live interpretation needs, as well as to have the different languages available in recordings that can then be posted to the website. And then my last slide on the outreach to date is to highlight the direct outreach to community groups prior to this hearing. So you can see on the slide the election code language that requires good faith efforts to reach out to various types of organizations and groups. And so the Pepe Smith team has partnered with the city to develop an initial list of those community groups. And we've contacted them to ask for their participation and for their help in putting the word out about this process through their own network. And if tonight there are any individuals or groups who would like to be a part of that and haven't already been part of those communications, we are more than welcoming for any additions to that. Please just go ahead and go to the website and go through that contact tab to share your information, and we would love to partner with you moving forward. And speaking of moving forward, this is the last slide about outreach efforts to come, to highlight some of the more significant efforts coming up in the near term. You can see here, hearing number 2 is scheduled for October 19th at 5 p.m. Then we have listed the 2 community workshops we've been talking about. We're looking at community workshop number 1 to take place on November 1st at 7 p.m. And then community workshop number 2 will be sometime in November. We're still nailing down a location for that, so the date and time are to be announced. And then we're also going to continue partnering with the city on a couple of different forums and media outlets of their own. So people who tune into CityNet will see in October a segment on what's happening around town with some districting news. And then we'll also be utilizing the city manager e-newsletters, which go out to more than 6,000 residents to further publicize the whole process. And then for each of these hearings that are coming up and for the workshops, we'll continue to use each of the tools we've talked about tonight to just further reiterate and engage people so that they're aware of each step. This will be especially important as we do approach that 3rd hearing and 4th hearing, so people will know the deadlines for when they can submit their draft maps and provide that feedback for consideration. And with that, I will transition to a few general slides on behalf of the larger districting team. So here you can see a brief recap of all the recommendations from the staff report that staff provided to you on this item. And lastly, before we open it up, here are the notes and questions for consideration as the session is opened up for public hearing. And so with that, I'll open it up for any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you for the information, the detail. And then, yes, it was a lot, but I think you walked us through it effectively. So thank you. And the city manager, is there anything else from you before I see if my colleagues have any questions on the presentation?
No, council member. Thank you very much. Happy to respond to any questions and then return back to the decision on a commission after questions.
Okay, when I turn to my colleagues first, we'll see if there's any questions on the presentation so we can get clarity, or if there's any more detail that you wanted through the presentation. Thank you. Councilmember Mason.
Thank you. That was a helpful presentation. I just wanted to ask when we were going to be provided the alternatives, which is something that I believe the majority of council had requested in our intent to move forward as part of the decision to move forward.
Sure. Yeah, Councilmember Mason, quick clarification. Are you responding, or are you asking about alternatives, maps and options with regard to district elections, or are you referring to alternative election methods?
We discussed the alternatives to districting, and then you offered also, in addition to that, alternatives to voting methods. So at this point, it would be both.
Sure. Let's first talk about alternatives to districting. Based on the city council's direction to transition to district elections and do the analysis, that process will happen through the data analysis that NDC puts together. And council will have various, if you choose the option where council is the final decision maker, you will have options through that process of what the district maps look like. I can ask NDC to provide additional commentary on that, and then I think we should build to the alternative voting structures, which I know we talked about in the report, but was not talked about in the presentation, and so we can talk about that.
Yeah, just very quickly. basically, what NDC does is for every map submitted by members of the public or organizations or anyone who's coming to the table in this process, all of that becomes public record. All of that is processed by NDC and posted online onto an interactive review map. So you can see all of the different proposed maps. And then we have a series of meetings, right? These will be the last two public hearings where we can go over the maps, depending on whether it's a commission or council. NDC will take direction on how to revise those maps, which maps maybe we usually encourage our clients to select 3 to 5 maps to focus in on. And then hopefully from 3 to 5, you go down to maybe 1 or 2. We make tweaks on those maps, and then ultimately a final map is adopted. So that's how the process works in terms of actually selecting the map.
Did that answer your question, Councilmember?
I think that I feel like if we're finalizing the map and we're
having problems. I'm sorry, Councilman.
I guess a better question is, because if we're finalizing the maps, then it means that we're still we're focusing on districting. And so let me just ask, are there no other alternatives to districting?
So the alternative to districting would have been to remain at large. And so because the council did decide to move forward with districting, this really is the ideal time to do it because the census data was just released. And this is something that can be completed in time for the 2022 elections. Have we seen cities switch to districts and then switch back? That I don't know if we've actually seen yet, but again, keeping in mind that if the city were to change course and not continue with districts, that the city would then potentially be liable under the California Voting Rights Act and may receive one of the letters alleging violation of the law.
Conclude for now. Councilmember Hamilton, please.
I also have questions on some of the information that was in the staff report but not covered in the presentations tonight, and that has to do with the staff report was very clear that it's obvious why we need to go to district to districting, and why some of the other things that we've talked about, rotating mayor and alternative voting mechanisms, aren't on the table now because of the time it would take to do all of those things, and the impossibility of doing them all simultaneously. So all that makes sense, but what I'm not clear on is if we're looking at establishing 4 districts now, because that's what fits our model. If we were to go to a rotating mayor structure, which obviously would require a vote of the people, would we have to go do this entire process all over again? Because we would no longer have a directly elected mayor, which would mean that the at-large seat wouldn't be directly elected anymore. I'm just concerned about in that area. This is more of a comment. I'm also a bit concerned with the rushing that it was no fault of anyone, but that several month delay in getting the census data means that limited our options a whole lot in order to make the deadline that the council set last year. And that's not a criticism because no one would know that we wouldn't get the data, but I think that's something that we might need to consider.
Yeah. Jovan, I don't know if you wanted, I'm sure you have things you wanted to say. I just was going to say in terms of having to redo the districting process, if you do the process now and establish 4 districts with that at-large mayor, right, keeping that, then you don't have to go through the process again until 2030 after that census. Now, if in the interim you decided that you wanted to go from 4 council districts to 5 council districts and have a rotational mayor, then you would have to go through the process again. Yes. And the question about the mayor is complicated by, of course, this 1977 proposition that says there must be 4 council members and an directly elected mayor. Rotational mayor is not a directly elected mayor. So that may require voter approval to change. That is my understanding from our conversations with the city attorney.
Yes. Kristen, you said it exactly. I can recap it, but what I'll also say is that staff did have initial conversations knowing that this topic may come up, and there may, and I say may be a way, should the data support that, where the city could transition to 5 districts through the districting process if the data showed that doing that was in furtherance of complying with the California Voting Rights Act. That may allow, if the council so desired, to not have to amend the 1977 ballot measure. All depends on the data, and at this point, it's way too early to say. But to recap what Kristen said, because in 1977, the voters in the city of San Bruno passed a measure which said the city of San Bruno shall elect a directly elected mayor and 4 council members, that really constrains the box to which we can undertake district elections under. And what that is really is the one citywide district with a directly elected mayor and 4 equally shaped council districts. There is the potential that if there's not enough time to, if there was a desire from the city council to change the directly elected mayor, to put it on the ballot, get that information by November 2022. If we call it a special election, which will be very costly, and we probably at this point wouldn't even have the data in order to do the work to convert to districts by November 22. And so we're really caught in a situation that in converting to districts, we really need to keep with that intent via the 1977 ballot measure, Measure F, where it's a directly elected mayor and 4 council difference, but for the small chance that in some way in compliance with the California Voting Rights Act, it would be a fair situation to have 5 equally shaped districts, and that will require both the data, concluding that, and significant legal analysis to avoid going back to the voters, and maybe something that the city decides not to do. And so I hope that's clear. There's another question that Councilmember Mason asked that's talked about in the staff report about alternative voting mechanisms, and I just want to make sure that we address that and not overlook that. But are there any more sort of discussions on this topic before we go back to that topic?
I just wanted to add that if the city were not going to adopt districts now, you could be forced under this California Voting Rights Act to adopt districts in a much shorter timeline. So what you're working with now does give you more time for public engagement. And also to put it in perspective, you know, every county in the state right now is working with a December 15th deadline and the same data release. So, you know, you do have a little more time than that, at least.
City Manager, you wanted to go to the other, back to Councilmember Mason's question?
Absolutely, and thank you, Councilmember Mason, for bringing that up. So yes, there was a discussion at prior council meetings and full city council direction to, through this process, look into potential alternative voting mechanisms. And let me pause right there and say what that is. That's not necessarily the district structure. That's how members of the city council are elected. And the classic versions are ranked choice voting or an instant runoff process, where it's not just simply the person with the most votes wins, but there's a separate process to determine who's the winner of that council seat. So we did analyze that. Unfortunately, to have an alternative voting structure, we need to be what is called a charter city. We are currently a general law city. In order to be a charter city, that needs to be approved by the voters. The next time in which we can do that is November 22. The city council has already given prior direction through a strategic initiative to look at a potential ballot measure to become a charter city tied with potentially having a real estate transfer tax for commercial properties. That is an existing initiative on staff's work program that we are working on, and we will be coming to the city council in the second meeting of October 26th, as it's noted in the staff report, to talk about ballot measures. Should the city council elect to include alternative voting measures, and at that time, we can research a ballot item that calls for us going to district elections, that calls for the city becoming a charter city that includes the transfer tax and potentially an alternative voting system. That does create a significant timing and workload hurdle to get all of that done. And there are challenges to putting that on the same ballot where council members, where members of the public will be electing members by district for the first time. And so yes, council asked, are there alternative voting methods? Absolutely. Can we do them right now? No, unfortunately, we cannot, because we are not a charter city. Should we become a charter city at some point, we can act into the charter. If so directed by city council, we can look to have that as a part of the initial process. That is there are some complications to that, but we are ready and will be and can discuss that with the city council at that October 26th meeting that's already on the calendar, where we will get final direction from the city council, or we'll be looking for final direction from the city council on what items the staff is preparing for potential ballot measures for November 22. And so that really is the time to talk about alternative voting measures, because it has to be linked to becoming a charter city.
Thank you. Are there any other, at this time, questions from colleagues on the presentation? I do want to open it up. This is a public hearing. I know that we've had Mr. Tong been patient, and I'd like to go to the public at this time, since it is a public hearing, and anybody from the public who wishes to speak on this topic, you could raise your virtual hand, and the city clerk will bring you in to the room for your up to 3 minutes.
First speaker is Jeffrey Tong.
Hi, this is Jeffrey Tong. I actually raised my hand before City Manager Gurgan mentioned city charter, but if we do adopt the city charter, would we need to put it on the November 2021 ballot? Or is there, if that's not enough time, can we put it on what, February or March, something like in the spring, prior to November 2022?
Thank you for your comments. Is there anybody else from the public that wishes to speak on this topic at this time? Once we do close public hearing, I will not allow you to be able to come back to speak. So now would be the time in which to please have your comments heard. Not seeing any other persons wishing to speak, I'm going to ask for a motion and second to close public hearing, please.
Motion to close.
Thank you.
Second.
Motion made, seconded. Medina Hamilton to close public hearing. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Aye.
Councilmember Mason?
Aye.
Councilmember Salazar?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Marty Medina,
Aye.
Mayor Rico Medina.
Aye. There was the one question from Mr. Tong, and I think the city manager, I believe you had kind of answered it in regards to the timeline and the cost, that it would not be viable for, it is not viable for this November, nor would it be, it would, if it were to be done in a special election, the magnitude of the cost would be quite high. Am I correct, or you want to help add anything to that?
Absolutely. The cost of a special election we anticipate would be roughly $500,000, so $500,000, as well as there's a timing issue that even if there wasn't a money issue, there's a timing issue because while this process needs to be concluded by April 22, there's also other election timing deadlines with the county elections office if the city did desire to put a special election on the ballot. Just there's not enough time for this process, and so we're really looking at keeping with the intent that the city council set in March of 2020, which is converting to district elections in 22 and doing all the prerequisite analysis in community meetings as was presented tonight. Thank you.
I'm sorry if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Please, city attorney.
Yes, the city manager is absolutely correct. But one other aspect of this is that a charter city cannot be put on the ballot except at
I lost, you went, somebody muted you, and I don't think it was personal, but you got muted.
the charter city has to be done at a regular election. It cannot be done at a special election.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it. With that, it's back to my colleagues. As you know, we received the report. We are being asked to direct staff on the possible formation of a districting commission, and we've been given 3 options. Don't know if my colleagues have a particular thought process on that. Don't know if it would be helpful to bring it back on and have it as a shared screen. Would colleagues want that on a shared screen again, or is that not necessary? Okay, not necessary. Then looking for, there were 3 options. Anybody want to offer their comments or suggestions? Thank you, Councilmember Mason.
Yeah, so I wanted to first thank the consultants for just confirming that this is the only option forward for us, and that there's no alternatives. I think knowing that when we look at the 2, I would prefer 1 or 2, and I would actually like to ask, because I know we've gone back and forth with staff around time, and I'm wondering if there's a new commission that started. Is that workable within everybody's schedule? Because it's saying that, you know, the council would appoint the commission, so that's going to be a couple of meetings. The commission recommends a map to the council, which I'm guessing it would be a map that would come to the council anyway if it was just number 1. And then council retains authority to revise and adopt final map. And I'm just wondering if we're better off if it goes to council, and then instead of having meetings to appoint a committee, have town hall sessions where the council can actually ask the public what they'd like to see for the time spent, since it's eventually going to come to us anyway, versus actually creating a commission and then having, you know, to host all these commission meetings to essentially come back to us again. So I think just timing wise, what's the thought process around that?
So what I've heard out of the 3 options, 1 or 2, but obviously you had a question in regards to some of the particulars. City manager is a response, please.
Yeah. So thank you to the mayor. In response to Councilmember Mason's question, staff thinking exactly, we would really encourage and recommend option 1, given the time and what we would need to do if there was a commission established is go through the full analysis and policy setting questions with the commission, a whole host of meetings there. And then also, because that commission's decision is not binding, repeat that process for the city council. It's also very important to note that There's robust community engagement in any option we choose. You had a presentation on the website, can be translated into many, many languages. We are taking the additional step of when we have virtual sessions on Zoom to have translators, so someone can go to a room where the information will be provided in Spanish and Chinese. We are also will be doing that for any in-person workshops we have, and the printed material will be translated in at least 2 languages. So we are going above and beyond of the communication outreach efforts for this effort because it is that important, and it will change how members of the City Council are elected. And it's also important to note that there were 2 workshops in November. There will be one during the week and one on a Saturday. And so the one that said TBD, that will be a Saturday date, and we are currently securing a location for that Saturday session. We'll announce it. And so we are also making that a part of the outreach.
Thank you, City Manager. I just want to be mindful that we're coming up on 6:40, so I'd at least like to get around the room and have everyone give their input. Next will be Councilmember Hamilton, please.
So based on what was just discussed, obviously the most important part of all of this is the community engagement. And given that we're going to get that in any of the options, given the short timelines, I would be in favor of option 1.
Thank you for your comments and making it concise. Thank you. Other comments from my other 2 colleagues? Councilmember Salazar.
Thank you. Yeah, I really would have preferred establishing a commission, but given the constraints that have been spelled out, it doesn't seem like it's an option. And given that we're constrained by a lot of other parameters that basically take the politics out of it for us, then it seems like it's a reasonable option to go with number 1. So I will go with that recommendation as well.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. It does get a little bit more complicated by choosing and approving who's going to be on this board. To remove the politics and to help out with the time, I think option 1 is the best option.
And my comment is similar to others, that with the timeline we have to go out and notice, recruit, take applications, interview, then come to a council meeting and appoint, we're losing time. And then that body needs to be able to meet. And so I think we could find ourselves even up against a tighter time limit. I'm with Councilmember Salazar. I would have preferred committee/commission, or whatever the terms you want to use. But I think due to the timeline and the efficiency factor, 1 is my choice at this time. So I've heard from 4 of us that are 1, and Councilmember Mason, I know it was 1 or 2. Where do you fall, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of us think commission is the best approach, but the reality is that, under our strong governance, we are committed to reviewing all of our commissions and committees anyway. And so I don't know that now is the time to add a commission when all the meetings are going to be public. There's going to be opportunity for public engagement, and ultimately the map will come to us. So I'm fine with number 1.
Okay, so at this time, and council will correct me, I hear a 5-0. It's not an official vote, but it is direction is what we're being asked for. So all 5 council members and mayor and vice mayor have directed staff to please go with selection 1. City Manager, is that clear?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
No problem. Appreciate that. And like I said, I think all of us would agree there was a lot of information, but did a really good job in the presentation and in PowerPoint and getting through all that. Is there any other action or items that are needed on this topic? City Manager?
No, no other actions needed.
Okay. Colleagues, if there's nothing else, then we'll go ahead and adjourn to the 7 o'clock, and you'll have a little bit of time to take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. So with that said, we'll go ahead and adjourn at 6:40 p.m. from this special meeting. Meeting adjourned. We'll see you at 7.